The Galaxy S20 Plus is one of our top-ranked phones of the year so far, but at $1,200, it's not a phone most people can go out and buy on impulse. The LG V60 is a compelling alternative for $300 cheaper, but one of the most important factors when comparing high-end phones is just how well the cameras stack up. My name's Hayato with Android Central, and let's compare the various cameras on the Galaxy S20 Plus and LG V60. At first glance, both of these phones have very similar camera layouts. The Galaxy S20 Plus features a 12-megapixel primary sensor that's 65% larger than the sensor in last year's Galaxy S10, along with ultra-wide and telephoto lenses and a time-of-flight sensor for measuring depth. The LG V60 sports a 64-megapixel primary sensor with 4:1 pixel binning for 16-megapixel output and similar ultra-wide and time-of-flight sensors, though interestingly, LG didn't include a telephoto lens this year. In broad daylight, both phones take similarly great photos with their main sensors. Shots from the S20 Plus have Samsung's signature punchy look with high contrast and lifted shadows, while the V60's look is a bit less over the top. With close-up shots for objects like flowers or people, the S20 Plus gets fantastic natural bokeh, softening out background objects better than the V60, but it also suffers considerably more from lens flare, something I barely experienced at all on the V60. Now, no lens flare is great, but the V60's camera does tend to wash out pretty badly in harsh sunlight. Still, that's easier to work around in post, and I like LG's flatter, more muted colors versus Samsung's oversaturated look. When it comes to low-light photos, again, both phones have their ups and downs. In auto mode, the V60 picks up more detail than the S20 Plus, which you can really see in the lining of my chair, but it also casts a nasty yellow tint over the whole image and lifts the highlights a bit too much. The LED moon is completely blown out. Once you jump into each phone's night mode though, I think the S20 Plus actually takes the lead in detail, and its colors and exposure are much more realistic. The V60 tries way too hard to whiten the background, and once again it overexposes. It turns out there's actually a purple ambient light just out of frame to the right, and everything from the moon to the flooring looks significantly clearer on the S20 shot. Now, it's hard to complain about the wide-angle lenses on either phone. Both companies have offered wide angles for a long time now, and while you shouldn't expect the quality to stack up perfectly against the main sensors, these are two of the best ultra-wides you'll find in a phone. Again, the S20 Plus suffers pretty badly from lens flare in some photos, and you can see some haloing around backlit objects like buildings, but if you look hard enough, you'll see the same effect on the V60's wide angle. If you ask me, the biggest difference in the shooting experience with these phones is how each handles zoom shots, and this is definitely where Samsung takes a big lead. The Galaxy S20 Plus doesn't have the space zoom camera of the S20 Ultra, but it still reaches all the way up to 30x using a combination of 10x digital zoom and a native 3x telephoto sensor. This lets you get incredibly close to a subject without losing a ton of detail. By comparison, the V60 relies entirely on digital zoom, defaulting to 2x and reaching up to 10, though if you push it that far, you'll end up with dramatically more grain than on the S20 Plus. In LG's defense, the V60 does hold up surprisingly well against the S20 Plus, up to around 3x, and that's largely thanks to the additional detail granted by the 64-megapixel sensor. But once that dedicated telephoto lens kicks in, the S20 Plus wins by a mile, and it's strange to me that LG ditched the telephoto lens from its previous V50. So both of these phones have pro video modes that give you manual controls while you're filming, though the exact capabilities of each are a bit different. This is the S20 Plus interface, and you can see we have controls for things like exposure compensation, white balance, focusing. You can throw it in and out of focus, and you even get this nice handy focus peaking. You also have values for temperature, tint, contrast, and so on, as well as your shutter speed, which you can change pretty quickly. Switch that back to auto, and the same goes for the ISO. Now, what's interesting about the S20 Plus's manual video mode is that you lose access to 8K video. You can only shoot it up to 4K at 60 frames. That's plenty for me, but you may or may not care more about that. Once we start filming though, you can see that we instantly lose access to some of the controls like shutter speed and ISO. Basically, all we're left with is the focusing controls, white balance, and exposure. Now, on the LG V60, you have access to a few more controls. So similar to the S20 Plus, you can see we have controls for things like shutter speed, ISO, and the focusing. If you tap on here, you can switch it back to autofocus, or once you enable manual, then of course you get focus peaking as well. In the bottom left corner, you have audio meters for both the left and right channels, which is super handy, and you also get labels for the resolution and the frame rate you're shooting at. Now, if we tap the frame rate button over here, you can see that you can choose between 720p, 1080, 4K, or 8K, unlike the S20 Plus. And once you start shooting, you still have full access to different controls like ISO, shutter speed, manual focus, and white balance. One last note before we wrap things up: if you're a frequent selfie taker, the V60 isn't going to be your jam. The 10 megapixel front camera on the V60 just looks bad with virtually zero facial detail. The front cam on the S20 Plus with the same 10 megapixel resolution looks much sharper, and as an added bonus, gives you the option to go slightly wider for group photos. Overall, I think the S20 Plus is the more versatile photo tool, matching the V60's ultra-wide lens and edging out with better zoom and bokeh, but that doesn't mean you should rule out the V60 entirely. You get more manual video controls thanks to LG's camera software, including the option to shoot manually in 8K, and LG's image processing doesn't overload your photos with saturation and contrast. For most people though, the S20 Plus is probably the way to go. That's as far as cameras are concerned anyway. If you want to know more about each phone, we've got full reviews on each here on YouTube and written companions over at AndroidCentral.com. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment down below letting us know what phones you'd like us to compare next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe.